Hey everybody, it's Ethan again, back to do part two. For those of you that wish to subject yourself to listening to me talk longer, this one will be about family. I know it might be a little long, so I apologize, but there's a lot to process after spending about 9 days at home. Trip is 10 days total, but like taking away the travel days, really about 9 days at home. Um, so I went home knowing, it had been 2 years since I've seen most people in my family, except for my parents. And, I also went home knowing that my parents were not interested in trying to call me Ethan. I didn't feel like they were ready to do so. So I got off the plane, and, my dad and my grandparents came to pick me up, and my grandfather actually came in to pick me up from baggage claim, and he didn't recognize me at first, so I had to kind of wave him down. And then he gave me a hug and was like, "Hey, how's it going?" And he was like, "What were you going by now?" And I was like, "Ethan." But then he got onto the tangent about calling me by my birth name, or the male version of my birth name, which is his name. So I'm kind of named after him. And I was just kind of like, okay. And then he walked outside with me. My dad was waiting on the curb with my grandmother, and they both called me by my birth name. And my grandmother was like, "You look like you've lost weight." My dad was like, "No, no, it doesn't." I was like, "No, I haven't lost any weight. I've actually gained weight from the hormones and stuff." And yeah. So that started the discomfort. And then we stopped at a restaurant on the way home, because my parents' house is an hour or so from the airport. And we were going to grab lunch, and the waitress, in true Southern fashion, was like, "Gentlemen, come on in and sit down," because my dad and my grandfather and I walked in first. My grandmother was outside. And it kind of went from there. She was calling me like honey and baby the whole time. Like, my dad kind of laughed. He was like, "She thinks you're like a 16-year-old boy." And I was like, "I know, thanks." But the nice thing, I guess, and I didn't really give them credit for this, is nobody corrected her. And I was very worried the whole time that somebody was going to call me by my birth name while she was at the table. But it didn't happen. I was ready to like jump in before anybody could say my birth name if it did come to that. So I don't know. It didn't come to that, but it was funny to like see somebody out in public interacting with me as male in front of my family who was still really trying to figure this out. So yeah. Then I went home, and I have a younger brother. He's 11. I know, huge age gap. Same parents though. But anyway. I saw him. He was sitting in the yard waiting for us to get home, and I called him over because he was kind of being shy, and he doesn't know me very much. I've been out of the house since he was 2, so he sees me every so often, but not a lot. And he came over, and I asked him some questions, and it was okay. And then I went inside, and we were talking to my grandparents, and my mom came in, and she was like, "Your brother says you look like a teenage boy." It's like, "Yeah, thanks." And so, that was kind of the start of everything. And that was the first like couple days of the trip. Like, nobody was really addressing the whole trans stuff. I did come down one morning for breakfast, and I had shorts on, and my mom was like, I was showing my mom my leg hair, which is pretty good, and she was like, "Oh my god, please cover that up. You're gonna give your grandparents a heart attack." And I was like, "They're fine. Like, it'll be okay." They didn't say anything. They saw me later. It was fine. But yeah, and then my parents wanted to know if I wanted to go to church with them the next day, and I was like, "No, not really." Although for the first time ever, my mom actually left it up to me. She was like, "It's up to you whether you want to go or not." And I told her I wasn't, I didn't really want to. And it was fine. And my dad said on the way out, he was like, "You should come. It'll be good practice for us." I'm like, practice for what? Like, you haven't called me Ethan yet. Like, do you know what you're gonna say? And he was like, we'll just tell everybody. And I'm like, it's not that easy. Like, at church, come on now. I didn't put my hopes on that one, so I didn't go with them. But I feel like I didn't really go out in public with them. And even when we were like outside and the neighbors were around, like, I tried to kind of remain hidden, I guess. I don't know. I didn't want to have my family, try to explain what was going on, because I wasn't sure that they were capable of it. And I realized that was something that we could have talked about beforehand, but we didn't. And so I didn't want to get ambushed or put in some weird situation, which I was later when I went up to New York and saw the other part of my family. But anyway. But yeah, actually, things did get a little bit better, though. My aunt and uncle came over with my other set of grandparents later on in the weekend, and my aunt walked in, and she got it all started. She was like, what are we calling you? I was like, well, I would prefer Ethan. And she was like, Ethan it is. And so she called me Ethan. She had a hard time with the pronouns, but she was calling me Ethan, and everybody else kind of started to try by the end of the night. That was after we had a good, probably a good 2-hour family discussion about kind of the process I went through, and, I got asked a lot of questions, and discussion about the name, and, everybody was kind of like, Ethan, like, where did that come from? Like, it's not a family name or anything. I'm like, I know it's not. We're a big Italian family, so names are a big thing. My brother wanted to know why I didn't go with a crazy name. Like, he's like, what about like Rocco or something? I'm like, what? Like, I'm not trying to be a goofball. Like, like, no. So, whatever. Like, how many times do you get to name yourself? Like, I tried to explain. There's a lot of people. The consensus seemed to be that it would be easier if I just went by the masculine version of my birth name. And I explained that, like, no, because it doesn't. My name and what I'm trying to do here needs to create like a separate identity, and I'm not, like, as much as I'm not trying to make my past disappear or forget about it, there does have to be a definite split there, and the name helps with that, I think. I have to be able to move into that new life that I'm creating for myself, and I think they started to get a little bit, although I think they feel like it would be easier if they could just use the masculine version of my birth name. But that is a highly uncommon name, and I'm not going by it. So Ethan it is. So we got past that. And there was a very tense discussion. My mom asked me pretty pointedly about suicide, and had I thought about it and what my plans were if I had. And I was honest with them. I mean, there was a period of time around this time last year, where I was really struggling. As I was trying to come to grips with all this. It was before I started therapy. I was in therapy, but it was before I started therapy for the trans issues. And I did have thoughts, and I did think about suicide, but I never made a plan or anything. But even telling them that was hard to relate, because immediately everybody's like, oh, we're so glad you didn't do it. And my mom was crying a little bit, and so was my sister, because my sister was pretty much the only person I interacted with during that time. I really kind of pushed the rest of my family away for a little bit of time. I needed space for myself to process a lot of things, and having them and their input was not helpful at the time. So I did talk to her, but even then she was like, I knew what you were going through, but I didn't know how to help. And so she kind of cried too. But it was it was a really good discussion. I think a lot of good came out of it. They really got to see, like, full on what my experience was getting to this point, and what my plans are going forward. And it was okay. I felt the most open during that moment, during that 2-hour conversation. And then afterwards I had to go take a walk, because I needed some space and some time alone. Like, that was the most emotionally draining thing I've had to do in a while. as good and beneficial as it probably was, and as healing as it was for my family, probably, it was still hard and it took a lot out of me. But yeah, so, I spent a few more days at home. My older brother came home. He's not older than me, but older than the younger one, so he's about to be 20. So he's a little bit closer in age to me, but he and I have always been close, and I was excited for him to come home, but when he did come home, I did find it a little bit hard to have him around, because I feel like a teenager, and to have him be 20, it kind of put me in a weird position of not being the older sibling. I'm the oldest of four, so to not feel like the oldest sibling was weird, and also, like, I felt like I was trying to compare myself to him quite a bit, and like I realized I don't really look a whole lot like him as much as I thought I did, and he's an attractive young man, and sometimes I don't really, people are like, oh, your brother's such a handsome young man or whatever, and I'm like, I'm a young man too, but and so I think with him around, it made it feel like I could feel the difference of, like, people were not relating to me as they did with him, and they're relating to him as a young man, and they're still relating to me as a young woman, and that was tough to still be regarded as everybody's granddaughter and niece and sister and daughter. That was hard. I really felt very torn apart by that, trying to process that, and try to keep myself intact and feeling like I have felt like a young man, and kind of like feeling like you're keeping up a circus tent. Like, I gotta keep the poles up. That made no sense. Whatever. Yeah, I don't. It just that was the difficult part, and I hadn't expected that. As good as it was to see him, it was hard to be around him a little bit. So, yeah, that was a visit, and then I went up north and saw quite a bit of my family from my mom's side, at least, and my dad's side. A couple of people. We're originally from New York, so I did get to see a lot of family up there, and that was actually where I was out in town a little bit more, and it's kind of a small town, and like people know our family, and so there were a couple times I got introduced as my mother's oldest, which everybody knows is a girl, so automatically it was like, oh, you're so and so, and I'm like, yeah. And we could have talked about that too again before we ventured out, but I didn't do as much talking with that side of the family. I did a little bit. Saturday I went up to my aunt and uncle's house, and my other aunt and uncle were there. I have a lot of aunts and uncles. I should like number them or something. Yeah. And that was actually pretty good. I was worried about it because my one aunt was having a hard time with it. Even while I was at home, she had called me to see when I was going to come visit them, and we had a really tough conversation, which I felt like she was still trying to make me, or just that she didn't really believe this process was right for me, I felt like. And then but her and I had a really good discussion when I got to her house, and it was nice to have my other aunt and uncle there because they kind of coached her into telling her 3 kids are young, and they kind of helped her explain it before I got there, like what was going on. And so it was funny because when I got there, the kids were the best. Like, they were like, Ethan, come play with us. So like I got to play some made up roof ball game and baseball out in the backyard with them, and that was fun. Like, they, the 2 little boys are hilarious, and the little girl was like really shy, but they were good. They call me Ethan the whole time, and he, and they were the best with the pronouns. My aunt and uncles had a little bit of a harder time with the he's, but they were calling me Ethan for the most part. Yeah, I mean, a few slip-ups here and there, but actually pretty good on their part. So that was nice. But my aunt and I did have a really long conversation after everybody left, and her and I were still awake talking, and I kind of felt like she got it, but we've had that kind of conversation before, and I thought she got it then too, so, I don't know, there may be some back and forth still, but ultimately she was like, are you happy? And I was like, yeah, I'm happy. I'm happier, And she was like, well, then that's all that matters, I guess. So that was good. But yeah, by that point though, I was really ready to just come home. Like, I really wanted to come home. And I was pretty, like, I felt like I kept having to ramp myself back up every time for these kind of conversations, and I was getting a little thin on the emotional side of things. You know, I did take a nice long run into the countryside, but you know, it wasn't enough. I needed some space by myself, like alone. And I also felt like, you know, going back east was just hard because I didn't really feel safe, and I felt like I had to think about a lot of things. And I was a little more, I was back in kind of my pre-T mindset, and it's kind of how I felt the whole time. Like, I felt in a very strange sense that I wasn't transitioning at all when I went home. The whole trip, the whole East Coast experience, I really felt like, I really felt like nothing had happened. Like, people were not really commenting on any changes. You know, obviously my leg hair is crazy, but you know, I would point out like the facial hair, because I did let that kind of grow out down here. A little stubble I get on my chin now, and so it kind of got straggly, and there's a few more hairs popping up now. And you know, a lot of the women in my family were like, "Oh, we have that too. Don't worry about it. Like, it just happens." I'm like, "That's," but I'm excited about that. Like, you're being a little bit of a killjoy here. Like, I'm trying to explain it to you, like a teenage boy, like, getting excited about his facial hair coming in, like, not a young woman, like, being upset because I have to pluck my hair, like. And I know they were trying to relate, but that was not. It felt dismissive of the process that I'm going through, and I know they're not really sure how to relate to this right now, but you know, so that was kind of funny and hard, but yeah, I really felt like I was not. And I think because the whole trip kind of made me feel like I was taking a step back, having to go back and just being treated in a way that I haven't been treated in a while. Like, I'm out here, I'm with friends, and I'm open, and you know, it's all he and Ethan, and you know, people interact with me as a young man, and to go home and not have that was a little unsettling and just kind of hard. So yeah. Yeah, it just put me in this weird spot where I just didn't feel like I was transitioning at all. In fact, I kind of felt like I was detransitioning or something, like all the tea had just left my system. You know, I know I hadn't, but yeah, I think it kind of made me realize, like, some of the things that I think have changed probably haven't quite changed that much. And you know, the one thing that everybody pretty much mirrored all across the board was just like, you're still the same person. I'm like. And at first I took that, like, the wrong way. Like, no, I'm not the same person. Like, I'm changed. Like, I'm changing. I'm happier. I'm better. I'm physically changing. But, like, what they meant was, like, at my core, like, I'm still the same person. And, you know, I do want that. Like, I am not going to change as a person, but I will change, if that makes any sense. So, yeah, it's just, yeah, the whole process was just very, it was a little bit of a struggle. Good. And things can be good, but they can still be hard. It was helpful. I'm trying to think of it as just a healing step forward with my family. And, you know, one of many that probably needs to be taken. But, you know, it was a good step, I think. In some ways it went better than I had expected. So, you know, the name thing I think will eventually get there, hopefully. You know, especially once I get like full-on facial hair and some changes really start happening. But for now, it was good enough. But yeah, so that was my experience home. I hit my 2-month mark next week, so I will probably wait to make an update video on changes then. So yeah, so that's it for now. That was my family trip home. Anyway, take care, everybody.